This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This is Sarah, and I just want to take a moment to speak to you about this week's sponsor, Favor. Favor, Inc. is a statewide family-led nonprofit 501c3 organization that is committed to empowering families as advocates and partners in improving educational and health outcomes for our children. Favor is the Connecticut state organization of the Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health. Favor offers a single place for families with children who have medical, mental, emotional, and behavioral health challenges to find information, assistance, and training. To find out more about Favor, please go to favor-ct.org. We are grateful for our opportunity to work with Favor as a sponsor, and now on to the rest of the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caregiver Chronicles. My name is Sarah, and today I am here with Marianne Sciucco. She is the author of the book Blue Hydrangeas: An Alzheimer's Love Story, a former family caregiver, a registered nurse, and also the co-founder of AlzAuthors. Hello, Marianne. How are you today?
Hi, Sarah. I'm great. How are you today? Thanks for asking me on the show.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm great. I'm so glad to have you on. Would you like to further introduce yourself to my audience?
Sure. I'm a registered nurse. I started my nursing career in 1990, and it was in long-term care, mainly with dementia. And I became an LPN at the time. And then I went on to become an RN, and I was a case manager. And now I am a campus nurse at a community college. So I've kind of done a lot of different things.
Awesome. Thank you. You know, you were also a family caregiver as well for your
Yes,
stepdad and your
my
mom.
stepfather and my
Would you
mom.
like to talk a little bit about that journey?
Sure. We were blessed because my mom lived to be 91 years old, and she did not have any health issues until the very end. It started when she was around 80, 88, something like that. And her husband, she was married to a man who was much younger than her, and he was exhibiting signs of something's not right. And I decided that we needed to do something about it. I at least wanted a diagnosis because, sometimes there are things that can be corrected. And I didn't want to not do that. So I convinced them to go to a doctor. They went to their doctor. He was not helpful. And he really didn't want to push them to do anything. I think he was afraid to uncover something that was not, and he liked them. So he was a nice man, but he wasn't a good doctor. So I found another doctor for them, which is something that you have to do as a caregiver, is find somebody else because the doctor's not helpful. So I found this practice. It was perfect. It was called complex geriatric management because my stepfather was a very complex person. He was born prematurely in 1936. It was a miracle that he even lived, but he did incur some brain damage. And he was what you would say at the time slow, and spent some years in a school that was for, kids like that back in like the 1940s. And it was very different than it is today. And his whole life, he was impacted by his deficits. He couldn't read, he couldn't write. He had a speech impediment. He was not dumb. He was not a stupid man. Had a lot of wisdom, and he managed to take care of himself and manage his life pretty much with very minimal support. And married my mom. He was 51 years old when he married, and my mother was 60. At the time, she was a widow. So all of these things, I think, had an impact on him as he aged. He wasn't aging well. And he was a person, he was very immature. So he often would create difficulties in situations, family and group situations. He liked to play jokes. He was a prankster. He liked to stir things up. That was like his thing. And he would say, "Oh, I'm only kidding." And he would laugh, but it wasn't funny. And then it got to be more and more and more like a problem. People would call me and complain, and they wouldn't go there and visit anymore. And my mother was becoming isolated. She loved company. That nothing made her happier than having her loved ones gathered round. And she would call me and she would cry because she wouldn't see people. It was kind of heartbreaking. So when I went there, it was I'll never forget the day. It was like November 22nd, 2015. I drove there. They lived in Massachusetts. I live in New York. And I went there for a visit. And when I saw him and the condition he was in, I was shocked. He was just not himself at all. He was a guy that always, every day showered, shaved, dressed, put on clean clothing, presented himself well when he went out. And he went out every day. But he wasn't doing that anymore. He was just sitting at the kitchen table, unshaven, hadn't had a haircut in a long time. His clothes were dirty and holey. And he just was kind of slumped over. And I said, "What's the matter with him?" She says, "I don't know. Can you help me?" I said, "Yeah, I'll help you. But, if we start on this pathway, I'm not getting off it. We're not going to stop. We have to figure out what's going on with him." He had been sleeping a lot. He slept about 20 hours a day. Sometimes I would visit with them, and he would sleep the entire time, except to get up to eat and maybe be up in the middle of the night having snacks and watching television. And he didn't really do anything else. So that was concerning. And I thought it was going to be something simple. When you're a nurse, you know a lot of things, but when it comes to your family members, everything's out the window. I thought, "Oh, he's depressed. Maybe he needs some kind of antidepressant. That'll fix it." And when I brought him to the doctors, they said, "No, he has dementia." So she said, he needs to go into memory care today. And I was like, "What, are you kidding me? I didn't come here for this." I don't like this diagnosis at all. But we ended up scheduling him to see like neurology and psychiatry, and had an MRI of his brain, and he ended up with that diagnosis. So in the meantime, as this is going on, my mom gets into a car accident with a friend of hers. They're going to church, and her friend, it turns out, had a stroke at the wheel and crashed into another vehicle at a red light. And my mother wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and he landed on her and pushed her into the door and broke many, many bones on the right side of her body. So she was laid up pretty bad. So while all of this was going on, she wasn't able to participate in his situation. And at that point, she was so in so much pain and disarray that she just didn't even want to deal with his situation. So it was up to myself, and then my brothers were involved as well. So he was emergently placed into a geriatric behavioral health unit at a hospital.
Yeah.
And he stayed there for 5 weeks and was eventually placed in a nursing home. And he lived in the nursing home for 18 months before he passed away. And it was just an extremely difficult time. I mean, he was in a good place, and he was being cared for, and he was safe as far as that goes. But they had him snowed under with drugs, because when they tried to release the medications, he would become very disruptive and violent and abusive. And he was abusive at home too. He was constantly kind of out of it the whole time. Whenever I would visit, I don't know that he knew I was there or anything. So and then my mom was also at this time recovering from her injuries. And then, how it is at that age in life, when something catastrophic happens, it unleashes a whole cascade of unfortunate things where, her heart problem is now out of control. Her kidney problem was now out of control. She was deaf. She had lost her hearing. So she was having a hard time communicating. So it turned out to be a lot. And she lived like this. It was a long journey, but she ended up outliving him by maybe 6 or 7 months. after he
How
passed
did
away.
you manage, if you don't mind me asking, how did you
Mhm.
manage it? This is something we talk about a lot on Caregiver Chronicles, is how,
Mhm.
you become a caregiver for one person and suddenly you have to care for someone else too for however. And also you were caregiving professionally. You were working as a nurse, and there's similarities in my personal story and also differences. Obviously, you're working in healthcare. You're caring for your stepdad and you're caring for your mom who had this horrible accident. How did you balance all of this?
That's extremely difficult. So at the time, my hospital career had ended and I'm working college health. So that was a reprieve because my workday is more fun than anything. We have a good time. Knock on wood, there are not very many bad things that happen. My patients are pretty much healthy. They have headaches, they sprain their ankle, um, they have a belly ache, they have their period. It's like, okay, we can handle this. So it wasn't so the people that I worked for were great. My boss let me have off as much time as I needed. I only worked 3 days a week at that time. I worked part-time. I had started the AlzAuthors right before my stepfather was diagnosed. And so I already had like a good support team of people who understood dementia and what was going on and could help me and advise me and I could talk to. So that was very, very important because I just, I got to a point where I was so overwhelmed in grieving because, that was the component that I didn't bring to my job when I was counseling other people. I wasn't grieving because they weren't mine. And so suddenly when the person is yours and I'm invested because, he is my stepfather. We didn't always get along. I knew him for 30 years, but he was my mother's husband and she was my primary concern. She was a number one and whatever was good for her was going to have to be good for him because her comfort was not to be sacrificed. That was my attitude. And he didn't have any family. He didn't have any children. So he didn't have anybody to make for him to be their number one, unfortunately. I forgot much, not that I forgot a lot of what I knew, but it just didn't dawn on me until one day I said, okay, so if these people were my clients, what would I tell them? And then I wrote it all down, said, this is what you have to do, the plan. Do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And then I was back in the groove. I had that hat back on. So, because I hadn't been working in that for a while either, being in college health, I don't have to advise people on like how to get into a nursing home and all those things. So yeah, so that was like, really hard. And then I had the distance issue. So they lived 250 miles away from me. I wasn't there all the time. I didn't have eyes there. My mom couldn't. So the interesting thing, like my stepfather, he had a speech impediment. So he was hard to talk to on the phone. And then my mother couldn't hear. So she was hard to talk to on the phone. So the two of them, he wasn't the mediary. He couldn't mediate the discussions. And then she didn't hear. So I had to rely on other people that were present in their lives, my brothers, and then my mom's niece. My mom's niece moved in. She was the caregiver for my mother, the living caregiver. And I would visit every, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever. And I was managing everything else behind the scenes, all the business, the financials, the legal, the medical piece, all of that. And we had drawn up all the papers that you need for that situation just 1 year before he was diagnosed. It was exactly 1 year. I brought them to their attorney and because I thought they had done all this stuff. And then they finally said, oh, we don't do that. We didn't do it. So we had to do the living will, the power of attorney, the healthcare proxy, the will, the last will and testament, all that stuff was drawn up at that time. So I was fortunate I had that because if I didn't have that, it was going to be a problem because then it would have been my mom's responsibility. And her hearing loss was so significant, you could not explain anything. It was very hard to explain. And she couldn't talk on the phone. So when people would call and they'd want to speak to her or whatever, I'd be like, we'll try, but she doesn't hear you. So we
Yeah.
try to work that out. And that was extremely frustrating. So we had a caption call phone. And even that, I mean, that's a great tool, but not for serious things. Not when you're trying to navigate care and we're insurance companies and stuff like that and agencies and things. It was there's a lot going on. There's a lot of pieces and they're always moving. That was more of a hindrance to me, the distance and not being right there all the time, and the hearing loss more so than trying to juggle my work. That kind of was an easy part.
That's awesome that you were able to find comfort and or like peace or like escape in your healthcare job, because a lot of
Mhm.
family caregivers who work in healthcare just they don't have, that's just not a
Right.
luxury for them. And I think it's
Well,
also
the
oh,
problem with that is that you're busy caring for strangers and you have your own crap going on at home, and it's kind of hard. You have to be there because you need to make the money, but it's kind of like, I'm concerned about this person, but I really got to get back to my mom. That's
yeah.
what I care about. Yeah, it's hard.
Exactly. And it is a recipe for burnout. It is.
Hmm.
Family caregivers who work in healthcare are just more likely to experience burnout. But also, you mentioned too that you had all the paperwork in order, like
Hmm.
which is a huge relief, because I spoke to a young lady yesterday who did not have that
Hmm.
paperwork in order. Things kind of happened suddenly, and there was a reluctance and a hesitancy to get that paperwork in order. So I applaud your family, your parents, and you for getting all of that done, because
Yeah.
without that paperwork, who knows how much more difficult that journey could have been.
Oh my
Um,
God. I never dreamed that I was going to have to like activate and be his person, because I figured maybe he would die and that would be okay. That wouldn't work, put me on the spot for that. But then I thought maybe, I figured my mother would probably go first and then I would have to worry about him. But it was like years from now because he wasn't that old and he wasn't
yeah,
sick. So, he had a brain disease, but he was not, didn't have any heart problems or anything like that. Didn't have cancer or anything.
yeah.
Mm.
And especially for it to happen at the same time again is just,
Yeah.
or around the same time, it is just, but life happens when it happens, and
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think that's such an important lesson to remember, is that life happens in the order it happens for the reason it does, that's beyond us. um but
Yeah. In that situation, she wasn't of any help. He wasn't of any help to her. That was when she was injured. She was at the hospital. She called her niece and they were trying to call him and he was sleeping. He just slept all the time. So when they finally got home, and they never should have let her out of the hospital, but they did. When they came home and they said, Marge has been in an accident. She's hurt. He couldn't even fathom it. He's like, "Oh, are you all right?" And then he went back to sleep. So I said, "Well, he's no good to anybody." And then she couldn't participate in the care plan either. So at least in most situations, the one of the parents is able to help, or you're helping them, and they're in control. But it wasn't like that.
yeah. And I just, again, I can't even imagine how difficult that must have been.
Mm.
I want to change gears just a little bit and talk about your book, Blue
Mm.
Hydrangeas.
Mm-hmm. Blue hydrangeas, yeah. So blue hydrangeas turned 10 years old this year, and I am in the process of republishing it. I wrote a forward and has a new cover, and there's a prequel and another one to come on that story. But it's about a couple that live on Cape Cod in a bed and breakfast that they call Blue Hydrangeas. They're living their dream life when the wife starts to show signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's disease and is diagnosed, and her husband is her caregiver, and his goal is, he promised her that we will stay here at our home no matter what happens and I will never leave you. So that's a very common promise that spouses make to one another in this kind of a situation. But what happens is he has his own health issues, and pretty soon, well, it takes 9 years, um, his health issues become more overwhelming than hers, and he can no longer care for her. So the plan is for her to go into an assisted living on a temporary basis, kind of just to try it out. But on the day of admission, he can't himself to leave there, and so he takes off, and the two of them go on this journey all across Cape Cod, trying to reclaim their past and revise their future so that they can stay together. And I won't give you any spoilers, but It was based on some people I met in my work as a nurse. So I wrote from the male caregiver's perspective because we don't always hear that.
Yeah. No, I love that. That's beautiful. And there are a lot of great male caregivers out there. There are a lot of
Hmm.
sons who care for their parents, grandsons who care for their grandmothers,
Yep.
male nurses, male CNAs. Some of them were better than a lot of females that I knew in the field.
Right.
And also, again, male spouses a lot of times can be very protective and very nurturing. We don't always see men in that nurturing role,
Hmm.
but they really, when they need to for their wife, they can be very protective and very nurturing at the same time, and
Right.
very, my wife likes this, and I have a few males that I could think of in the assisted living facility where they live together, and the husband would be kind of was, well, the wife had dementia, the husband maybe didn't, and would really give us like the lowdown on what he expected from us for his wife's care, and would really
Hmm.
make sure we were doing the best we could. So I think that's beautiful, and I think that's awesome because that
Thanks.
that role gets underestimated. And then how did your book lead to All's authors?
As you can imagine, a book on about Alzheimer's, even a novel or a love story, is a really hard sell. So I was having a hard time getting it out there. And at the time, I was involved in a writers group called Clean Indie Reads, and we all supported one another by sharing social media, blog posts, newsletter swaps, and things like that, helping each other with the whole writing, publishing, marketing piece. I was doing that for a while, and one day it just dawned on me, maybe I should see if there are people who have written other books on Alzheimer's and dementia that might want to do the same thing, and we can help each other instead of trying to be out there on our own. And I knew a few people. So I reached out to them and we did a 1 month program in June of 2015, doing just that thing, sharing each other's books and blogs and things like that. There were three of us at the core who really liked each other and we enjoyed what we were doing. So in November, we did it again because November is Caregiver Month. And then the following year, I said, why don't we do this again? But let's do something bigger. Let's start a blog and we're going to call it AlzAuthors. And they were like, sure, let's do it. So the plan was for June, we were going to do one. We were going to invite different authors to come in and share their books on our blog. It wasn't about us anymore. So we invited a whole slew of people. We didn't know what we were going to get because we're a known entity. And the authors that we reached out to were we didn't reach out to famous people or anything like that. We reached out to just authors who were ordinary people, caregivers, nothing, no fame or anything like that. And we said, well, let's hope we can get 20 posts because we want to schedule them Monday to Friday for 4 weeks. So let's hope we get 20 people. So at the end of the month, we still had more people. So we said, well, why don't we just keep going? We'll do one a week from now on until we run out. And so that was 7 years ago. We're still doing it. It's been crazy. So we do it every other week. We have a new author with a new book, or it could be a blog or a podcast or even a film. So we branched out into other media. And then we also have a podcast in the alternate weeks. So we interview our authors. So they're the podcast guests. So I do that with my co-host, Christy Byrne Yates. We just had our reached over 100,000 downloads. So we're really excited about that. And we have our 100th podcast coming out on November 3rd. And then we also started doing virtual events with the authors, bringing them in for panel discussions. And we've done book clubs. We did a book club with HFC, and we're doing another book club with Aging and Amazing in January. So we offer a lot to the caregivers. If they don't have time to sit and read a book, they can listen to the podcast. They're going to get good information, and all the books are vetted. All the books are read by one of us. We're on the acquisitions team, and we vet the books and make sure that they're true to life, and the facts are good, and the story is compelling and it's well done. And we also, because it's a collaborative, the authors are evaluated for what they can bring to the table as far as their own platform, so that they can share. The goal is that everybody shares everybody else's stories. So yeah, we got a lot going on.
That's awesome. And that's
Mhm.
amazing. The fact that there's so many stories out there for families who are caring for someone with dementia, and the fact that you're
Mhm.
vetting them and you're not just throwing any old author with any old
No.
story out there.
Nope.
Now is it just fiction books or is it nonfiction as well?
Nope. Nope. We have nonfiction, fiction, memoirs, caregiver guides, children's books, poetry. There's art books, photography books, journal books, a lot. There's a lot of different things. And then everything is it covers many of the different situations. It covers like caring for your mom, dad, your spouse, caring for grandparents, the books for children, which are really great, young adults, young adult novels. And it goes into the different dementias, Alzheimer's, temporal, frontotemporal, vascular, Lewy body. There's books on all of those different things. And in our bookstore at AlzAuthors.com, if you go into the bookstore page, you're going to see everything all categorized for you. So if you're just caring for your dad and that's the only thing you care about, you don't really care about books about caring for your mom because that's not your thing. You just go click on that section and then all those books come up. And so you don't have to wade through like all this stuff that doesn't mean anything to you and waste your time. It's set up to save your time. And we have a search engine on there. So if you wanted just a book like say about Lewy body, because that's a little more obscure, you would type in Lewy body, and then all the books that have Lewy body are going to pop up. What you're going to see is the author's blog post. So all the authors are required to write us a post, and we give them a list of criteria, what they have to cover in the post. It's mainly the story behind their story, why they wrote this book, the impact that it's had. And you'll read about that author that way and about their story. And then if you want to pursue, you can go into the book, or they may have been on the podcast, so you can listen to it.
Awesome. That's amazing and such a great resource for family caregivers, even healthcare
Mm.
workers. I think
Yeah.
sometimes when you're really trying to grasp dementia, or at least I know for me, when I was working in a long-term care facility, there were times where it was difficult to grasp dementia and what the families were going through. And so when I took that moment to, think about what the families were going through or read a book or watch a movie related to family caregiving versus just my experience as a professional caregiver, it did change your outlook
Hmm.
on it. So
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, is there anything else that you'd like to share with my audience?
I want the audience to know that we have our podcast up on all of the major podcasting platforms. And we do record our virtual events and turn them into podcasts, so you can watch that and get the information from that. Now, last week we did one. It's called "Everything You Always Want to Know About Living with Dementia, but We're Afraid to Ask," and we have four of our authors on that, all talking about their disease process and their lives and everything. Which is to hear it directly from those folks that's the biggest lesson of all. In my opinion, those are the most important authors that we have, are the ones living with dementia themselves, and they're remarkable and it's very hopeful. Some of them have had their diagnosis for more than 10 years and they're extremely articulate. They just a group of people that have retained their verbal skills so they can really tell you what's going on and what their days are like and living in the fog and their insecurities and their anxieties as well. So that's going to come out on November 7th. I think it's November 7th. It's the 100th episode that we're publishing. We just did a program last week. So this is a good reason why you might want to be subscribed to our newsletter or our blog so that you can find out what we're doing. We did a film screening on a new documentary called Keys, Bags, Names, Words. It is absolutely remarkable. It will move you and inspire you. It's done the filmmakers traveled all over the world to bring stories of dementia and what they're doing in other countries from the science and medical point of view, but also from the arts. And so you will see people with dementia who are, dancing, they're singing, they're in plays, and the people that are supporting them and making it possible for them to participate in things like that is unbelievable. So we recorded, this is how this worked. It was a film screening, and we're not really going to try to screen a film over Zoom because it's just open up a host of problems. So what we decided to do is we would you could sign up to get the link to the movie and then watch the movie on your own at your own leisure. And then we all gathered together at a time to have a film discussion. And we had the film producer and the person that was the inspiration for the film present for our discussion. So we recorded that so people can listen to that. And there's like a lot to learn from that. And if you see that this film is playing in your community, you might want to make it a point to get over there or to contact them and see if you can schedule a screening wherever you are, because it was just it blew our minds. I had people there from the Alzheimer's Association. Last night I screened it at my college, and they couldn't even believe how wonderful it was.
Yeah.
Keys, bags, names,
It's
words. That's the name of it.
awesome. It sounds wonderful.
It
And I
is.
really think it's interesting that you're talking about people who are living with dementia, who are doing things like writing books
Mhm,
and, being in films and being active in life, not just locked away in a facility,
mhm,
as what kind of the societal expectation is. We forget that just society forgets that just because someone has a diagnosis, it doesn't mean while it is dementia, Alzheimer's, they're chronic diagnosis. They're not linear as far as how they progress.
mhm.
And it's not the same with every person. Progression for Alzheimer's can look different for everybody.
Right.
I have, and again, I worked in long-term care facilities for 17 years. I have met hundreds of people, maybe even thousands of people with dementia in some form of dementia, and nobody progressed the same. There were certain things that we would see that were common, but nobody's progression was the same. Some people would kind of plateau and be in the same place for years in a certain content spot. And
Mhm.
and other people, it would just seem to hit them like the disease and the progression till the end would just seem to come faster. It really is amazing. And like you said, intelligence, articulate and intelligent people. Yeah, Alzheimer's and dementia affects people from all walks of life, all brain
Mhm.
capacities, all things. And we forget that. We forget these things as a society. um when we're outside of the family caregiver realm, when we're outside of the healthcare realm, we're not looking at people with Alzheimer's and dementia as people. We're looking at them as a statistic, and we need to remember that they're individuals, and
Mhm.
with their own stories and different lives. And
Yeah.
I think that I just wanted to drive that nail home
Mhm.
for my audience, because
Yeah.
there's so many stigmas.
Yeah. That's what we're all about, is trying to eliminate the stigmas that are associated with the diagnosis. And of these four people, all of them have had periods where, they want to give up, or they thought that their life was over. And one of them tried to commit suicide twice and failed, and realized, I still have a lot to live for. And he is giving, 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 and more than many people who don't have dementia. Giving to the world is just beautiful, beautiful person, beautiful soul. And you can tell I'm crazy about him, but you can listen to the panel discussion to try to figure out who it is. But yeah, they have so much to give, and you have to let them and not put them in the corner or try to hide them, and bring them out. There's plenty of places to go to now for people with dementia as well. In your community, that's your job. You need to find out where to go, where to get help.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
100%. And kind of wrapping up on my final two questions. What is your favorite form of self-care?
I like to walk. I'll walk, especially on a nice day. If it's not a nice day, I don't really like to walk. When it's a nice day, I like to be outdoors and enjoying the sunshine and the blue sky and observing what's going on. I'm lucky because I live in a city, but it's very rural where I am. So I see a lot of wildlife. There's deer. Um, there's even like a little colony of wild cats that I come across. and they amuse me, and I like to listen, so I'll usually listening to a podcast or an audiobook or maybe some music. So it's just peaceful. My body's moving and I'm alone, and for that short time, 45 minutes to an hour, it's pretty good. It's good self-care time.
Nice. And I think self-care, I think walking is a great form of self-care. And
Mhm.
a lot of times it's something that you can do, for family caregivers with the person you care for. If they're still mobile, you can take them for a walk. And if they're in a
Mhm.
wheelchair, you
Mhm.
you could push them, and it's a great
Yeah.
change of scenery for both of you. Um, Walking is something I do with the boys, often. We usually go places and walk around or whatever, but it's something family caregivers can do, in that change of scenery. Just
Mhm.
sometimes just a little change of scenery of outside of your house is so refreshing and so good. And also my final question, where can my audience find you for more information?
Okay, so you can find my website. It's mariannesciucco.com, and also AlzAuthors.com. Everything is right there. The podcast, the bookstore, the blogs. It's all right there. And I'm on all the social media channels: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Although I'm thinking about leaving Twitter. And I started a Threads account, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I'm kind of like down on that right now, so I may not keep that
Well,
up.
well, no worries. We have a Threads account too, and we haven't really used it either. And I just deleted my personal Twitter because I don't use it. Um, I
Okay,
find more
yeah,
interaction. I find more interaction on some other platforms. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, and I follow all authors, and I would encourage my audience to as well, because again, there's some it's just a great page. It's just a great page to follow.
thanks.
So
Yeah, we
I've
provide a lot
been
of resources, and we have our
yeah.
beautiful artwork from my partner Susan Landy. So
Yes.
yeah,
And we're Whole
and
Care Network partners too. I wanted to share that.
oh yes, Whole Care Network. We're with them too. And the other thing is, we have our YouTube channel, so you can catch up on things there. And now I forgot what I was going to say about, we were talking about the social media. Oh, the newsletter. We have a newsletter every week. So you can subscribe to that on our page. I think if you do, you get one of our free booklets, and you can find out in your inbox every week the newest author, podcast, events, whatever's going on. And we're doing a giveaway next month for Caregiver Appreciation Month, World Alzheimer's Month. We're giving away copies of our audio book of our first anthology, as long as they last, US and UK only. And if you're interested in that, you can just shoot us an email at alzauthors@gmail.com. And then we're also giving away copies of our caregiver tip sheet on 13 tips for the long distance caregiver, which I wrote. So if you're a long distance caregiver, you might want to take a look at that, because there's some good stuff there. It's just
Awesome.
shoot me an email. Put my email address in the show notes.
Awesome. Yes, it will be all of your information, all of your social media links will all be in the show notes. And
Super.
again, I encourage my audience to follow all authors because I follow them on Facebook, Instagram, and I'm pretty sure I
LinkedIn.
follow on Threads also, and LinkedIn.
Mm.
So follow all authors. I've been, stalking their social media for years now.
Mhm. Great. We're glad somebody's looking at it.
I've been following it for years. And again, I recommend to my audience to check you guys out. And Marianne, I want to thank you so much again for coming
Thank
on
you. Thank you.
and spending time with me
Appreciate it.
today and sharing your story.
Yeah.
You're an amazing human, and I'm
Oh,
just
thank you.
grateful for your time.
All right.
So
You're an amazing human too, for all you do.
thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll wrap up this week's episode of Caregiver Chronicles. If you liked this episode and you'd like to support our show, you can by going to the link in our show notes for Buy Me a Coffee or Ko-Fi. But really, the best way to help and support this podcast is to share us with a friend. Share if you found this episode or any of our previous episodes helpful in any way, shape, or form. Share them with a friend. Share them with 2 friends. Share them with 5 friends. Share them on all your social media. And with that, we will see you next week.